Some practices were so routine in the 1950s that locomotive crews never gave them a second thought. Today, those same actions would land you in federal court. From toxic insulation to marathon shifts, these 15 everyday practices went from standard procedure to strictly prohibited. Number 15, lead paint on every surface. In the 1950s, locomotives wore lead paint like a badge of honor. That brilliant Pennsylvania Railroad Brunswick green, the striking Santa Fe red, and the unmistakable Union Pacific yellow were all achieved with lead-based formulations that delivered unmatched durability and color. Railroads loved lead paint because nothing else held up to the punishment of wind, coal dust, cinders, and endless weather exposure. Shop workers mixed and applied these paints without respirators, and crews touched freshly painted surfaces with bare hands. The paint chips that flaked off during routine maintenance ended up everywhere, from roundhouse floors to workers' lunches. When the federal government banned lead paint in 1978, railroads faced decades of costly remediation. Every locomotive repaint became a hazmat operation. Today, stripping lead paint from a single vintage locomotive costs over $50,000 and requires certified hazmat crews in full protective gear. Modern regulations treat even microscopic lead paint dust as a serious health hazard. What crews once wore home on their work clothes without concern is now classified alongside toxic industrial waste requiring special handling and disposal. Number 14, 16-hour shifts with minimal rest requirements. In the 1950s, a locomotive engineer thought nothing of running 16 consecutive hours through mountain grades and across endless prairie straightaways. The Hours of Service Act of 1907 technically limited duty to 16 hours, but railroads pushed crews to their absolute limit on every run. Engineers would finish a grueling shift, grab a few hours of restless sleep in a trackside hotel, and climb back into the cab before dawn. The law contained so many loopholes that companies routinely scheduled back-to-back marathon runs with minimal rest between. Congress finally reduced the maximum to 14 hours in 1969, then to 12 hours in 1976 following fatigue-related accidents. Today's regulations cap continuous service at 12 hours, with mandatory 10-hour rest periods, monthly maximums, and fatigue management plans that would have seemed impossibly strict to post-war railroaders. The Federal Railroad Administration can assess penalties exceeding $25,000 for a single hours of service violation. Dispatchers use sophisticated computer systems to track crew time down to the minute. The freewheeling approach to crew scheduling that defined the steam to diesel transition is now a federal crime. Number 13, no alerter or dead man's control. Steam locomotive crews in the 1950s had nothing to stop a train if the engineer became incapacitated. There was no alerter system, no dead man's switch, and no automatic braking to detect an unresponsive operator at the throttle. If an engineer suffered a heart attack or fell asleep after 16 hours on duty, the train kept rolling until something stopped it, usually something catastrophic. Early diesel locomotives were equally lacking. The fireman was a theoretical backup, but he was often busy with other duties and not continuously watching the engineer. Modern locomotives require alerter systems that demand periodic acknowledgement from the engineer, typically every 60 seconds during operation. Miss that acknowledgement and warning lights flash and an alarm sounds. Miss it again and the train goes into emergency braking automatically. Federal regulations now require these systems on all road locomotives. Older units have been retrofitted at considerable expense, and new locomotives cannot receive operating certificates without functioning alerters that meet current specifications. Running a multi-thousand-ton train without automated vigilance is now unthinkable and thoroughly illegal. Number 12, operating without toilet facilities. The steam era's solution to biological necessities was brutally simple: hold it or improvise with the tender. Locomotive cabs offered no toilet facilities whatsoever, and crews on long runs through remote territory improvised with whatever methods preserved their dignity. Early diesel locomotives often lacked sanitary facilities as well, and the ones that existed were frequently inoperable due to maintenance neglect. Engineers on 12-hour runs either developed exceptional bladder control or relied on creative solutions nobody discussed in polite company. Old-timers tell stories of relief bottles and desperate measures that would horrify modern compliance officers. The situation persisted until unions finally forced the issue. The Federal Railroad Administration, FRA, issued locomotive cab sanitation standards that took effect in 2002, requiring all road locomotives to have functioning toilet facilities that meet specific requirements. Today, inspectors verify these systems during every periodic inspection. A locomotive with an inoperable toilet can be cited for federal violations and removed from service until repairs are completed. The era of crews relieving themselves out of cab windows or into whatever container was handy is officially and legally over. Rule G, prohibiting alcohol possession or use on duty, existed in railroad rulebooks throughout the 1950s and long before. But enforcement was, to put it diplomatically, inconsistent at best. Old railroad hands tell stories of engineers tucking bottles into their grips for long overnight runs, of crews stopping at trackside taverns during extended layovers, of supervisors looking the other way as long as trains ran on time without major incidents. The culture tolerated moderate drinking in ways that would destroy careers today. A nip to ward off the cold during a winter run was practically expected in some territories. Federal drug and alcohol testing regulations came into effect in 1985, transforming railroad employment forever. Random testing, post-accident testing, and reasonable suspicion testing became standard across the entire industry. Today, the legal blood alcohol limit for locomotive engineers is 0. That is different from the automobile driving limit of 0.08. Get caught with any measurable alcohol and you face immediate removal from service, mandatory rehabilitation programs, and possible permanent dismissal. The days of the engineer with a flask in his coveralls are definitively over. Look at any steam locomotive photograph from the 1950s and you will see a single headlight centered on the smoke box. No auxiliary lights, no ditch lights mounted low on the frame, no supplemental illumination at all to increase visibility. Diesels of the era followed the same minimal pattern with 1 or 2 headlights mounted high on the cab. This minimal lighting made locomotives nearly invisible at grade crossings until dangerously close, contributing to thousands of fatal highway rail collisions over the decades. Canadian National Railway pioneered ditch lights in the 1960s, positioning low-mounted lights to create a distinctive triangle pattern with the main headlight visible from oblique angles. Transport Canada made them mandatory in the 1970s. The United States followed with regulations that took effect December 31, 1997. Today, every locomotive operating over public grade crossings at speeds above 20 miles per hour must have functioning ditch lights that produce at least 200,000 candela. These auxiliary lights must flash alternately when the horn sounds. Operating without them risks federal penalties and creates the kind of grade crossing danger that killed thousands before modern visibility standards. Number 9. No climate control requirements. The 1950s locomotive cab was an endurance test that modern workers would refuse to enter. Steam locomotives leaked radiant heat from every direction, turning summer runs into rolling saunas where cab temperatures exceeded 120 degrees. Winter meant the fireman's side baked from proximity to the firebox, while the engineer's side froze from poorly sealed windows. Early diesels improved somewhat, but air conditioning remained a luxury reserved for passenger service. Crews endured temperature extremes that modern safety standards recognize as dangerous. Heat exhaustion and hypothermia were accepted occupational hazards that crews simply endured as part of the job. The Federal Railroad Administration finally addressed cab temperatures in comprehensive regulations effective in 2012. All new and remanufactured locomotives must now have functioning air conditioning systems meeting specific performance standards. Cab heating must maintain at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit measured 6 inches above the engineer's seat. These climate control systems must be verified during every periodic locomotive inspection. A locomotive with an inoperable climate control unit faces federal citations and potential service removal. Number 8. Asbestos insulation everywhere. Every steam locomotive of the 1950s carried between 4,000 and 6,000 pounds of asbestos insulation wrapped around boilers, fireboxes, steam pipes, and cylinders. The mineral was perfect for the job, remarkably heat-resistant, extremely durable, and relatively inexpensive. Locomotive crews worked inches from this insulation every single shift. Firemen reached across asbestos-wrapped surfaces to adjust injectors and check gauges. Shop workers cut and fitted asbestos blankets without any respiratory protection whatsoever. The white fibers drifted through roundhouses like industrial snow that everyone breathed without concern. Diesel locomotives reduced but did not eliminate asbestos use. Gaskets, brake shoes, and pipe insulation continued exposing workers for decades. The health consequences emerged slowly but devastatingly. Railroad workers developed mesothelioma and asbestosis at rates far exceeding the general population. Modern regulations classify asbestos as a known carcinogen. Removing it from vintage locomotives requires full hazardous materials protocols, sealed containment, and certified disposal. What crews once handled bare-handed is now treated as deadly contamination, requiring protective suits and respirators. When a 1950s train derailed or crashed, investigators pieced together what happened from witness accounts, physical evidence, and educated guesswork. Locomotives carried no recording devices, no data loggers, no electronic memory of their final moments. The engineer's throttle position, brake applications, and speed at impact died with the incident. Accident investigations were archaeological exercises in reconstructing events nobody had documented. The first train event recorders emerged in Europe in the late 1800s, but American railroads resisted the technology for decades. Cost was one factor, and union concerns about surveillance were another. The Federal Railroad Administration finally mandated event recorders in 1995 for all trains operating above 30 miles per hour. A 2005 rule required crash-hardened memory modules capable of surviving fires, impacts, and complete immersion. Today's locomotives record over 20 data points, including speed, throttle position, brake pipe pressure, horn activation, and alerter acknowledgements. This data must be preserved for 1 year after any reportable incident. The 1950s practice of operating 1,000-ton trains without any permanent record is now a federal violation, subject to substantial penalties. The 1950s locomotive cab was built for crew access and forward visibility, not occupant survival. Thin sheet metal, minimal structural reinforcement, and large glass windows created cabs that crumpled like tin cans in crashes. Engineers sat exposed behind windshields that shattered on impact, and control stands that could impale them when the cab collapsed. Grade crossing accidents were particularly lethal because the cab took direct hits from highway vehicles with no protective barrier. The Association of American Railroads introduced its first crashworthiness standard, S580, in 1989, after high-profile crew fatalities. S580 specified stronger collision posts, anti-climbing devices, and improved short hood structures. The Federal Railroad Administration incorporated these requirements into federal regulations effective January 2009. Modern locomotives must withstand collisions with highway vehicles and with shifted freight loads. Collision posts must resist 500,000 pounds of static force. Anti-climbers prevent locomotives from riding over each other in head-on collisions. Wide-nose cabs built to these exacting standards have saved lives in accidents that would have killed crews in 1950s equipment. The thin-skinned cabs of the steam era are now prohibited. Number 5. Five-man crews with the caboose. In the 1950s, freight trains commonly carried 5 or 6 crew members: engineer, fireman, conductor, head brakeman, flagman, and sometimes a swing brakeman. The conductor rode in a cupola-equipped caboose at the rear, monitoring brake pressure and watching for problems. Brakemen walked the train at stops, throwing switches and coupling cars. This labor-intensive operation reflected union contracts and the technological limitations of the era. Technology eliminated these positions one by one over subsequent decades. Portable radios replaced visual signals between crew members. End-of-train devices replaced the caboose and the crew who rode in it. Dieselization eliminated the firemen who once shoveled coal. A 1982 presidential emergency board directed railroads to begin eliminating cabooses. By the mid-1980s, labor agreements had reduced crews to 2 or 3. The Federal Railroad Administration finalized a two-person minimum crew requirement in April 2024, effective June 2024. Today, operating a freight train with fewer than 2 crew members requires special federal approval and must meet stringent safety requirements. The 5-man crew that defined 1950s railroading has been replaced by a legally mandated minimum of 2. Number 4. No positive train control. In the 1950s, an engineer relied on wayside signals, timetables, and his own judgment to keep his trains safe from collision. If he missed a red signal due to fatigue, distraction, or sun glare, nothing stopped the train except physics and whatever was in its path. Human error led directly to catastrophe because no automated system existed to catch mistakes. Collisions between trains occupying the same track killed hundreds over the decades when signals were misread or ignored. Positive train control uses GPS, wireless communications, and onboard computers to monitor train position and speed. If a train approaches a dangerous situation the engineer fails to address, positive train control automatically applies the brakes, without requiring human intervention. The technology prevents collisions between trains, overspeed derailments, incursions into work zones, and movements through misaligned switches. Congress mandated positive train control in the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008 after a California commuter train collision killed 25 people. Full implementation reached 100% on required territory by December 2020. Today, operating on territory required to have positive train control without a functioning system is a serious federal violation. In the 1950s, becoming a locomotive engineer meant working your way up through railroad seniority. You started as a brakeman, became a fireman, and eventually earned the right seat through experience and union contract provisions. Promotion was controlled by seniority and internal rules, not by outside testing. No federal agency tested competence, verified training, or certified qualifications. Railroads ran their own promotion systems with varying standards and no outside oversight. Each railroad decided for itself who was qualified to operate its trains. That changed in 1991 when the Federal Railroad Administration established mandatory engineer certification after concerns about inconsistent training. The rule required railroads to develop Federal Railroad Administration-approved training programs, to conduct standardized testing, and to maintain certification records subject to federal audit. Engineers must demonstrate knowledge of operating rules, signal systems, the physical characteristics of their territories, and brake operation. Medical examinations verify vision, hearing, and general fitness. Certification must be renewed every 3 years, with continuing training requirements. Violations can result in permanent revocation. The informal apprenticeship system that created 1950s engineers has been replaced by federally supervised certification, ensuring consistent competence across the industry. Number 2, unlimited diesel exhaust emissions. When diesel locomotives replaced steam power in the 1950s, their exhaust was considered a vast improvement over coal smoke. Nobody measured the nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, or other pollutants streaming from those early EMD and ALCO units running at full throttle. Railroads operated these machines for decades without any emission standards whatsoever. The gray haze drifting from locomotive stacks in rail yards was simply the smell of progress. No regulations required cleaner combustion. The Environmental Protection Agency first regulated locomotive emissions in 1998, establishing tiered standards that tightened progressively through 2015. Modern Tier 4 locomotives must reduce nitrogen oxide emissions by 90% and particulate matter by 85% compared to unregulated engines. Achieving these standards requires advanced fuel injection, exhaust aftertreatment, and sophisticated engine management systems. Older locomotives face operating restrictions or mandatory retrofits in certain areas. Today, manufacturing or importing a locomotive that does not meet current emission standards is a federal crime. The unrestricted diesel exhaust that defined the first generation of American diesel railroading is now as obsolete as the steam engines it replaced. Number 1. Operating without federal safety oversight. Here is the fundamental truth about 1950s railroading. No federal agency had comprehensive authority over locomotive safety. The Interstate Commerce Commission regulated rates and routes. The Bureau of Safety investigated major accidents. but nobody coordinated nationwide safety standards, conducted regular inspections, or enforced compliance across the industry. Each railroad operated essentially as it saw fit, with safety practices varying wildly from carrier to carrier and sometimes from division to division within the same company. Congress created the Federal Railroad Administration as part of the new Department of Transportation, with authority established by the Federal Railroad Safety Act of 1970. This agency now writes and enforces comprehensive regulations covering everything from track conditions to locomotive maintenance, from crew training to grade crossing protection. Federal Railroad Administration inspectors conduct thousands of inspections annually and can assess civil penalties exceeding $25,000 per violation. Today, operating any locomotive in interstate commerce without complying with Federal Railroad Administration regulations is illegal. The fragmented safety system of the 1950s has been replaced by comprehensive federal oversight. And that's all, folks. These 15 practices reveal how dramatically railroad safety has transformed in 70 years. From toxic paint to two-man crews, the 1950s locomotive world is now thoroughly illegal. Hit subscribe for more railroad history. Here is another video I have specially selected for you. See you next time.